Don't make a poop joke. Don't make a poop joke. Don't make a poop joke. This week's episode of Drifters was really shitty. Damn it! In this week's episode of Drifters, Toyohisa, Nobunaga, and Yoichi liberate the elves from the evil Orte Empire. In this week's incredibly brutal, hardcore, excrement-filled episode of badassery. This episode was incredibly high on the action, violence, and shock value, especially the way that this week's episode ended. That being said, this was a thoroughly entertaining episode of Drifters. It also made me realize that Toyohisa just loves decapitating people. I don't think I've ever seen this many decapitations this early on into an anime series. It's getting kind of gratuitous, to say the least. Gratuitous, but incredibly fun. This week's episode was also very simple, but that's not exactly a bad thing. It just allowed the viewers to sit back, relax, and watch a lot of really brutal action. And brutal is truly the best way to describe the Drifters themselves, as their style of warfare is incredibly different than the ones that the people in this fantasy world have ever seen in their entire lives. It's so much more ruthless and just frankly kind of fucked up, especially Nobunaga's big plan where they actually collect the dead bodies of the Orte Empire and they throw them into this pit which is filled with shit and urine and salt and all types of nasty shit, which eventually turns it into this like chemical warfare stuff, which is basically called saltpeter, which is what you basically make to make gunpowder. Essentially, they're going to coat all of their weapons in this material so that not only can they kill their enemies, they can ensure that they will die an extremely painful death. It is just fucked up. Nobunaga is a sick bastard. He's definitely, I think, the most like brutal and ruthless of the three main Drifters of the series, whereas Toyohisa is a lot more calm and seems to actually have a sense of justice. Something that I never really noticed until this episode right here is in the previous episodes of the series, when he's going up against his enemies, he just sort of indiscriminately decapitates everyone in his way. But in this episode, he actually encounters some of the Orte Empire soldiers who actually give up and surrender right there and decides to actually spare their lives. However, he does eventually reach a breaking point, but we'll get to that in a second. Really, this episode right here is just seeing the build-up to how the Drifters help the elves set up all of these traps and weaponize them so that they could go up against the Orte Empire as well as taking over their main castle from the inside, which was one of the best ways to end this episode right here. But I actually love that we got to see the preparations for war, how they actually created all of these different weapons, and getting to see how Nobunaga created these incredibly fucked up traps that even Rambo would freaking think was pretty too intense. He actually creates these like giant bottomless pits which are filled with these spikes, filled with all of that excrement, which when the soldiers fall in, not only do they get pierced and die, but they're not going to be able to escape, and even if they do, they're going to die of some sort of slow, horrible disease. All of the elves actually coat their arrows in this as well and just trap all of the Orte Empire soldiers in their village. They board it up, and then they just completely light the entire thing on fire, not allowing them to escape, while of course Yoichi hangs out in the forest taking out any stragglers, and Toyohisa just runs around decapitating everyone he can find and trying to take the leader's head, which he does in an incredibly stylistic and red fashion. The most shocking part of the episode comes towards the end, when the Drifters and the elves have actually stolen the armor of the Orte Empire soldiers. They wear them and they sort of pull off this like Trojan horse strategy where they go inside their castle and they reveal themselves to be the Drifters and the elves. They liberate everyone so that they can save their women and their children, and as they're making the way to the top, there's that great scene where Toyohisa actually decides to spare this one soldier who surrenders. He also tells the elves that this is how you do things. If someone decides they're not going to fight and they're going to lay down, let them go. That's just the way it's going to be. However, things change when they discover what's been going on with the elf women and children, which are systematically being tortured and raped. That's right. After all of the ridiculous action and goofy over-the-top anime expressions, the episode ends with an incredibly stark and disturbing scene of seeing these soldiers rape these elf women, and it's just messed up, to say the least. It's at that moment you know that Toyohisa is going to completely snap and give up his whole ideal of letting them surrender. Everyone is going to die. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Drifters? This was a really messed up episode, especially towards the end. When I was watching this episode late last night with a couple of friends who have also been following up on the show, when we got to that final scene of the episode, our jaws just hit the floor. It was intense and unexpected, and considering that the show has a heavy emphasis on over-stylized violence and ridiculous comedic expressions, we didn't expect to see anything go into territory that dark. But then again, this is from the creator of Hellsing, so of course we're going to see some really messed up shit. It also shows that this show has no problem with offending the viewer in pretty much any way possible. That and the fact that there was just an assload of action in this episode, so if you're looking for that, you're going to get a ton of it. But the coolest thing that complements the action is the fact that you get to see how they set all this up, and you get to see these stylistic differences between the drifters and the people who live in the fantasy world in the way that they fight. There's also some small little story moments which I think are pretty important. It apparently seems that the character of Yoichi has some sort of connection to that one other mysterious drifter who might decide to work with the Ends and might decide to work with the drifters. I think that they're brothers, or maybe they have relationships in some clan, but they clearly come from the same time period. But that's a pretty interesting element right there. It's easy to forget that with all of the incredible stylized violence that you're going to see in this episode right here. So, fantastic episode right here. I think one of the better ones from the entire series. I loved getting to see how they prepped the war just as much as they were fighting it, so I like this one a lot. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. Check it out, fans of Drifters. You might see something you like. If you're looking for just a high-octane, super violent action anime series, then check it out too. You might see something you like. If any of you guys did watch this week's episode of Drifters, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below. What do you hope to see from the rest of the series? What did you think of this episode overall? Were you incredibly shocked by this week's incredibly stark and disturbing ending? And what do you hope to see from the rest of the Drifters anime series? Thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you liked it, make sure to leave it a like and leave me a comment or two. I will see you guys next time, and as always, stay dandy, baby.